Hello and welcome. My name is Erica Aquino. I'm the Public Engagement Manager at the British Society for Immunology. Thank you so much for joining us over your lunchtime, and we're here today for our BSI webinar on COVID-19 vaccine conversations, discovering your path to effective public engagement. I'm joined by an expert panel today who will be sharing their experiences of what they've been up to around public engagement with the COVID vaccines. I have Professor Danny Altmann, Dr Mohammad Alhadj Ali, Dr Viki and Dr Zania Stamataki. I'll introduce them briefly, but just before we start, I want to talk to you all about our Public Engagement Vaccine Conversations Day today, and I hope you've all been joining in. So do check it out on social media, on our website, and do join us today to explore vaccines. So the idea of this campaign is building on from something we started just before Christmas, that vaccine engagement starts at home. And you are all the expert voice, and you are all part of your own communities, parts of your own families and friends, and you are the expert voice in this. And we're encouraging and empowering our members, immunologists, and the wider research community to go out and have effective conversations with people about the COVID vaccines. And we've started this campaign today all around finding your way. So it's all about that everyone has a role to play, and it's all about finding what works for you and exploring vaccines with the public. So we've created these characters, and the idea is that you might be one of these characters, you might be a few of these characters, and you can try these different things at different times and see what works for you. So we have the open book. You know, you might put yourself out there to answer questions. You might be the sounding board. You know, you might be directing people to sources of information. The magnifying glass, that's someone who maybe wants to look at a topic in depth. And we have the bridge builder, that's someone who wants to build the bridge between yourselves, information, and their communities. And then we have the helping hand, and that is really someone who is amplifying the message of others. So you can be any one of these, and we really are encouraging you to get involved today and join us. So how can you get involved? Use the official hashtag, explore vaccines, tag us in anything you post at BritSocIm. We're making a shout about it across social media channels, so do check it out. Take a look at our social media toolkit that has all our graphics and some suggested comms as well for you to make things nice and easy. And we have loads of resources to support your public engagement. We have infographics, Q&As, videos, animations. Do have a look and do use those. They are for you to be used. Check out our case studies. We have some inspiring case studies from our members that are doing great public engagement. Have a read of those and see if anything inspires you. And keep an eye out on social media today. We'll be having lots of new content that's going out. Please do like and share it. We have another one of our Instagram Q&As with Dr. Louisa James. So do head over to Instagram and share that and post your questions as well. And also let us know what you're up to. We'd love to hear from you. Drop us an email, messages on social media, and let us know what you're up to. We want to hear what our members have been doing so we can amplify that and shout about it as well. One other thing that I want to plug is the BSI's Guide to Vaccinations for COVID-19. This is a free resource that we're encouraging you to use and to share with your family and friends and your communities. It answers lots of common questions about vaccines, and it provides up-to-date information about the COVID vaccines. So do have a look at it and do share it with your communities. It's got loads of really useful information in there. So the final thing for me to say is thank you all for joining us, and I hope this webinar is useful. I will get to our speakers so we can ask questions, but really this is a discussion. It's a conversation about having effective public engagement, and so please do post your questions. There is a question box that you can click on and post questions, and I'll be putting those to our panel. So please do join us today. I will stop. And I will ask our panel to appear if that's possible. So hopefully our panel should be joining us now. Here they are, they've appeared out of nowhere. Hi everyone. So before we introduce ourselves, I do have a quick poll because I'd be interested to know who is out there and who's watching today. So let me launch the poll. Did that work? Here we go. So hopefully we are collecting some responses, and it'd be good to know who we're talking to so we get an idea of who's out there. I'll give you another 5 seconds. Do join in. Seems like we've got a lot of immunologists, a lot of BSI members. That's great. Here we go. About 30 seconds, I reckon that'll do. So the majority are, 66% are immunologists. We have some clinicians, we have some members of the public as well, and we have some other scientists as well with us. The next poll, just a quick one. I'd be interested to know what your experience is out there. So for our audience, how have you been engaging with the public about vaccines? Has it been, oh, hold on, here we go. Have you been engaging with the public? Yes, lots, maybe some, or you haven't started yet? It'll be interesting for our panel to see who's out there and what sort of public engagement you've been doing. Here we go, we're getting some votes in. I'll give it another 5 seconds. Oh, okay. So it looks like the majority of you, hold on, have been doing some public engagement. So that's good to see, actually. It's great to see that most of you have been doing some public engagement, and hopefully this webinar is going to give you some greater ideas, some different ideas of some other things you could be doing. So I'm now going to hand over to my panel. Have we lost someone? Potentially. Hopefully Mohammed will come back. So we'll start with Danny. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. So give a quick 5-minute introduction and let the audience know what sort of public engagement you've been doing around COVID vaccines. I'm going to go to Danny first. I'm going to go alphabetical order.
Yeah, so hello, I'm Danny. I'm Professor of Immunology at the Hammersmith campus at Imperial College. And when I try to think what on earth I've been doing, in the past year of COVID, it's kind of been under about 5 subheadings. One is just doing COVID research, with the lab and in the lab 7 days a week and trying to find stuff out, including quite a big meta-analysis of all of the vaccine trials, phase 1, 2, or 3 that have ever been reported. Quite a lot of policy advice work in various spheres. Quite a lot of media work, radio and television, newspapers and things, where I try and limit it to a few events per day. Otherwise, people get very, very irritated by me, including my family and my colleagues, stroke competitors at work, because people, kind of too much of a good thing. One part I've really valued is quite a lot of sessions with sort of BAME healthcare worker groups in the workplace to just hear their points of view and hear their discussions and hear their concerns and just try and have a discussion, which I think sometimes has been more educational for me than for them, to kind of have my eyes open to just, different standpoints and different points of view and different concerns in the workplace. And when I haven't been doing that, I've been doing similar kind of meetings for anybody who asked me, really, in school groups and things like that, to try and just talk vaccines and talk immunology. So that's me.
Thank you very much, Danny. And I'll go to Mohammed next. Oh, Mohammed, you're on mute, Mohammed.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammad Alhadj Ali. I'm a clinical lecturer in diabetes endocrinology at Cardiff University School of Medicine. My background in research is immunotherapy for type 1 diabetes. So I'm an immunologist as academic clinician. I'm very much interested in the world of immunology and immunotherapy. When the pandemic of COVID-19 started, I found myself as a clinician on the front line, being in exposure to the virus and also to people who've been affected by the virus as well. I represent as well BME community in the workplace, and I'm a champion for public engagement and involvement at Cardiff University School of Medicine. So putting all these things together, I thought myself I could be useful in campaigns to publicize and talk more about the pandemic itself, about the vaccines, with involvement and engagement with the media, especially those who are speaking Arabic language. So I've done about 50 interviews for TVs and radios as well in Arabic language, tried to bridge the gap and tried as well to provide the useful information for those who speak Arabic, those in the UK or those abroad. And also quite important for me to be involved in other BME activities, such as the Muslim Doc Camry. And this is a network of BME healthcare professionals here in Wales. And these guys actually organize different activities in different languages. So far, 10 webinars in 5 languages, and we're going to have our 11th webinar with a 6th language this weekend, which is great to have the most of outreach with all these communities within the BME community, and also sharing platforms as well with other agencies or organizations interested in BME. So I like the slide you provided at the beginning, Erica, which is fitting yourself in one of the roles there. So I find myself sometimes as a board sounder. I find myself sometimes as a bridge to the knowledge between people there and to reach communities. Sometimes I can see myself a hand helping other people as well, or an open book to talk about things. So what I want to say that we talking about the vaccines here and exploring vaccines, we don't have to limit ourselves to a specific role. We can be anything of these nice 5 roles you showed at the beginning, and I'm sure everyone can be helpful to other people there. And I'm very delightful to be in this panel today.
Mohammed, do you want to do the hosting? You've just taken all my words. No, that's brilliant. That's exactly what this webinar is about. So thank you so much, Mohammed. I'm going to go to Viki next.
Hi everyone, I'm Viki. I'm a lecturer in reproductive immunology at Imperial College London, and I've been mostly engaging with people on social media, really Twitter, and people do email me as well, but usually because they found me on Twitter and they want to have a little bit more of a private conversation. And I have to say that this is not really ever something that I expected to do, but I got into it back in December because all these rumours started to circulate that the COVID vaccines would cause infertility. Now that was just plain misinformation, but nevertheless it made a lot of people very worried. And the specific claims were to do with the immune system attacking the placenta, which is precisely what I work on, or actually I work on why that doesn't happen. And so I thought, if I, as a reproductive immunologist, won't stand up now and explain why this isn't true, then literally what's the point of me? And so I wrote a thread on Twitter all about it, and that kind of took off. And then a lot of people started asking me a lot of questions, many of which I didn't know the answers to, many of which at the time no one knew the answers to, although we have way more data now, so we know a lot more now. But I kind of got it into my head that I really ought to know the answers to those questions. So I went and found out, and actually I found loads of information, which I put into a Google Doc, which I share very widely so that people can find it easily. And so for me, one of the major things that I do is I keep up to date with what's going on in this really specific area of COVID-19 vaccines, fertility, pregnancy, and breastfeeding. So I guess I am your magnifying glass, Erica. And since I have all of that information now at my fingertips, it's pretty easy just to very quickly answer pretty much any question that someone throws at me on this particular area, although I do still have to go away and look things up specially. And I don't think any of us should ever be embarrassed to admit that we have to do that, because there's a lot of information out there. So quite different actually to what Danny and Mohammed are doing. I'm mostly engaging people one at a time about their very specific concerns rather than kind of broadcasting. And so in that way, what I'm doing is probably quite similar to what a lot of you might end up doing when you talk in a one-on-one situation with your families, your friends, your colleagues, people who know you, who have questions. And so I guess I'm here to provide that perspective today.
Thank you very much, Viki. You're all getting the hang of this with the characters and what you're here to represent. Thank you so much, Viki. I'm going to go to Zania next.
Hi everyone, my name is Zania Stamataki. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Birmingham and I'm a viral immunologist. I love immunology and I always loved viruses as well, so this is fantastic for me. I mean, a new virus jumping to humans, this was so exciting. And it came actually at a time where I just got a fellowship to work in a class 3 environment on hepatitis viruses, so our labs were good and ready. So when this new virus came along, we were able to culture it, we were able to study it in a replicating format, and that was fantastic. It was fascinating. And during lockdown, it meant that I could turn back into a postdoc and I can go into the lab and I can do a lot of the research myself, which I had really, really missed. I went down to Porton Down to Public Health England to get signed off to work with this virus, and we just set up lots and lots of different assays, basically. My interest is in looking at the immunity to infection and vaccination. So first thing we did was set up neutralization assays of replicating virus. But in fact, there was a huge need at the time to look at disinfectants and antivirals and all sorts of devices and things that can help people live normal lives while this virus is around. So that was a really fascinating part of what I did. Being an immunologist, I was involved with the British Society for Immunology, and in fact, around about, I think April it was, when I was asked to write an explainer about immunity to coronavirus infection for The Guardian. And I always had an interest in public engagement. During my fellowship, I did media training. And in fact, a lot of you, if you said that you have had some involvement with media, I highly recommend it. Media training can be found through your university, and most universities have got a press office that they can hook you up with people that can give you some confidence about how to deal with the media. I'm not very eloquent myself. I feel really awkward being on TV and on the radio. I'm not a native English speaker. So this has helped me quite a lot to communicate my science as well. I write well, I write better than I speak. So a lot of the engagement that I did, particularly at the beginning, was writing articles. So after the first Guardian article, there were others, other editors would contact me and ask me, could you speak about this? And the way I saw my role was as an explainer. I wanted to be able to convey what we know about immunity to coronavirus for the lay audience that never had an interest in immunology before. So I wanted to use language that everybody can understand. And in fact, it was fascinating because my family back in Greece rang me up and they said, oh, now I know what you do. So for many, many years, they couldn't appreciate what I was doing. So I tried to engage with people that previously, and actually even now, they don't have an interest in science, but they need to understand some basic things because they need to make decisions that affect their families and their lives. So that's where my role comes in. And I liked engaging with the U3A groups, with schools, with Café Scientifique. I really like the conversation. And like Viki said, people do tend to write to you. As an immunologist, I spent most of my adult life in a dark room looking down a microscope. It's fantastic to hear what people think and having these conversations. So that's where I'm coming from, and I hope you choose to get involved with public engagement as well. I find it really rewarding.
Thank you very much, Zania. I think already heard some really inspiring things. Thank you all. So I am going to take questions from the audience. So do put your questions to our panel if there's anything specifically to any of them, or if you just want to hear a bit more about their experiences. So we have some questions coming through already, but I thought maybe I'll start one, like a nice easy one that everyone can answer, which is, what motivated you to start speaking out? What was that first thing that got you into this? Maybe we'll go back to the beginning, and maybe I'll go to Danny first.
Yeah, I think just all of the above and all of the words that you've just heard from the others, that, I've spent many decades of my life in immunology and vaccinology. And, it was a case of, if not now, when, in terms of sticking your head above a parapet and saying something. So I couldn't improve on what's already been said.
Thank you, Danny. Does anyone have anything to add?
If I add something here to this one as well, the nature of my work involves as well clinical trials. So clinical trials, it's quite important to engage with patients as well, get their opinions when you design the trials, and also get the feedback throughout the trial and afterwards as well. So engagement and publicity as well, I mean, it's quite an important element of this work as a clinical trialist. And for me, I always see myself someone trying to bridge the gap between bench and bedside, trying to translate what we see there in the lab and what great scientists do always, and translate that one to the bedside. So I think that element as well encouraged me to do more and more of public and patients involvement and engagement. And I think it's an opportunity now to invest in the skills I've gained over years now, and to put that one for the benefit of public.
Yeah, brilliant. Go, Zania.
I just wanted to mention that from a viral immunology perspective, this is a tremendous opportunity that we have. We have the ears of the people at the moment, and we can dispel myths, and we can help them understand that vaccination is critical as well. Before the pandemic, it was very difficult to get your message across to large parts of the population. Now people are interested in vaccination. Now is the time for us to repair previous damage from misinformation and hopefully change things. So yes, if not now, when? I think it's an excellent time for us to step up.
Thank you, Zania. Viki, did you have anything to add?
Well, I think I explained really the very specific piece of misinformation that got me into this, but I suppose it's also worth mentioning that, you know, as a mother of 2 small children, I felt in the first lockdown, when I had to stop all of my work, and because of the nature of my home situation, I also had to homeschool the children all day, that I had trained my whole life for a big pandemic, and now one was coming, and I was a primary school teacher. So for me, there was also an aspect of like, oh, you know, now's my chance to actually make a difference. And I think I've actually probably made more of a difference by talking to people about this than I would have done had in the first lockdown I've been able to go into the lab and do all of that cool and fun stuff that a lot of you have been able to do.
Thank you, Viki. It's really interesting to hear a diverse perspective on it. So I've got a question from the audience. So looking specifically at some questions that the public may have around COVID vaccines, someone's asking, how can we tackle questions on long-term safety when the vaccines have been developed so quickly? And I'm sure you've all got an answer for this one. Would anyone like to start?
Yeah, I have a few points.
Go for it, Viki.
And this comes up a lot in the context of fertility, because people are often saying like, oh, well, you know, how do I know that I can have a baby in 10 years' time? But I think something that's really important, and a lot of people don't realise, is that, you know, the first trial participants for the mRNA vaccines were recruited in 2006. So we've got 15 years of follow-up on them. And the first trial participants for people on an adenovirus vector, well, the ChAdOx vectored vaccine, were recruited in 2012. So we've got the best part of a decade of follow-up on them. So we can very confidently say that there's nothing specifically wrong with the platforms. And, you know, particularly from my point of view in fertility, we can also say that no vaccine has ever caused a reduction in fertility. So I think it's worth pointing people to that information, because I think a lot of people don't know what a long kind of pedigree these vaccines have. They seem like they've come out of nowhere, but actually they haven't.
Yeah, no, perfect, Viki. Anyone want to add anything to that? Go on, Zania.
I was going to say, so it's the wordings that people use that are important. For example, people say it's an experimental vaccine. These are the words that I try to grasp on and explain to them that actually that's not true. A vaccine that has had a successful clinical trial and has been approved is no longer an experimental vaccine. It's about things like efficacy versus effectiveness that I try to explain to people what they actually mean, and what all the horrors in the media and the fear-mongering are actually unfounded. And in fact, sometimes you have to discuss a little bit of science as well. For example, when somebody can deliberately go on social media and show you tiny sequences of the vaccine that is the same as, for example, an area in your human placenta or whatever, you have to pop up and say, actually, that's rubbish. So sometimes, as immunologists, we're finding it difficult to criticize other work in a public setting. And I say, absolutely, do not engage with trolls and do not engage with negativity. But as a specialist, if you see something that is wrong, you can call that out. You've got the authority to call that out. You've got the expertise to call that out. And in fact, calling it out actually really helps.
Thank you, Zania. I'm just going to ask, if you're not speaking, to mute yourself, just because we're getting a bit of echo. But Danny, did you have something to add?
Yeah, no, I was going to add a tiny bit. You know, I think the kind of point that Viki brings up is kind of unassailable, that you know, we've all had this thing about, but how can they be safe if they were rolled out in 10 months? And I think we all tend to give the same answer, which is the correct answer, which is yes, you know, 10 months of you know, plug and play insert of the spike on the back of, you know, 10 to 15 years of hard graft in other contexts using these platforms, really tried and tested and really well known. And the other thing that one would always add to that is, if you acknowledge and look at the history of the very, very rare adverse events in vaccinology, those are very rare adverse events, usually either at the time of priming or at the time of a first challenge. I struggle to think of any example where something weird and unexpected happened 5 or 10 or 20 years later. I don't know who could point me in the direction of something like that. It's just devil's advocate to try and imply that it happens.
Thank you, Danny. Really useful. This question's come through, and it kind of ties in with what Zania just said. And I think it's one that, from my experience, that what I've heard from BSI members is something that they are quite worried about, and that is potentially coming across some anti-vax sentiments. And so, firstly, I would like to know if you've had any of those experiences, and potentially how you've handled them, but also potentially just to reassure people what sorts of conversations you've been having. I think as the BSI, we don't give platform to anti-vax. It's, we're not going to be talking about conspiracy theories, but we do like to encourage people to voice their concerns. And most people just have questions, and they may have heard some misinformation, and they just have a bit of genuine concern. I might be wrong, but I'm going to maybe go to Viki first, because obviously she spoke a lot about tackling misinformation, and just to give your experience and hopefully let people know it's not too scary.
It's not too scary. The vast majority of the experiences that I've had, and bear in mind that I'm kind of like wading out there on Twitter, so I'm really just engaging with strangers, has been really positive. But I will tell you that I have met some proper anti-vaxxers, and my strategy for dealing with those, and this is what I'd suggest to all of you, is just know your comfort zone. So my comfort zone is usually, to kind of respond to a question, maybe 2 questions, but if it's clear that I'm not getting anywhere, my time is better spent talking to those people who have genuine concerns, who actually want to know the answers, rather than the people who've already made up their minds. If your comfort zone is not even to answer those 1 or 2 questions, then you can totally just say, it sounds like you've made up your mind, and I don't think that we're going to have a very productive conversation here. So you don't have to get drawn into those discussions. But I think for a lot of people, unless you're really, really putting yourself out there, you will, like Erica says, mostly just be meeting people who are like, oh, I'm not sure about this, I've heard that. And a lot of people who say, I've heard this and that, have actually heard it from anti-vaxxers, as it happens, but they're not anti-vaxxers themselves. So that you don't usually have to actually deal with people who are really, really, very, very against vaccination. Most of the time, you'll be dealing with people who are just unsure.
Thank you, Viki. Did anyone else have any experiences to add? Mohammed?
Yes, Erica. So the way how we did this with the BME community, so through what we call it like fact sheets. So we looked at the most common misinformation on the social media, and then what we did, we put like the facts, and which is based on science and evidence. So we put corrections for these questions. For example, does the vaccine change your DNA, for example? So then we put the right answer for that one. Does the vaccine correlate to long-term complications, or does that affect fertility? Is that safe in pregnancy? Does that contain this and that? So we answered all these questions in a very simple way as fact sheets, and that's been done by the British Islamic Medical Association, which looks after like a big population of BME here across the UK, in addition to other organizations. In Muslim Doc Camry, for example, we recommended these fact sheets, and we tried to spread them on the social media. And it's nice when that comes as a simple, short fact sheet, which brings the question clearly and with a very clear answer to that one. So my advice for those who would like to tackle these misinformation in specific communities is just like to put all of them on small sheets, and then put the right answer for that one and try to spread that one on social media. So I think that will be very much effective, and we could see like nice spread out of these fact sheets around the community.
Can I come back in very quickly on a point?
You can, Viki.
which is, I think if you're doing this for the first time, and I'm learning from my own experience here, it's really important that you don't spend too long explaining what the misinformation is, because a lot of the time people can't necessarily be bothered to read, you know, 3 sentences into where you explain why it's wrong. So I found it's always really important to very quickly be like, let me explain why there's evidence that there is no effect on fertility or whatever. You need to get that first sentence in before people lose interest in what you're saying.
Thank you, Vic. Danny, did you have your hand up? Go for it. Oh,
yeah,
you're on mute. Okay.
yeah. No, just to add a sort of quick addendum that yes, you know, it is outside our comfort zone to engage with anti-vaxxers, and you know, intuitively that it's always, you know, you always prefer to not kick the hornet's nest. And I can think of one radio station where I get quite a lot of invites, where you can just guarantee that 5 minutes after I come off air, I'll be deluged with trolling from anti-vaxxers. I don't know, listen to the same program or what. And you know, the answer is that if I've managed to communicate with lots and lots of people, and there's a small fringe out there who want to send me messages afterwards saying he's a crazy professor who wants to poison our children, then you know, I'm a big boy and I can live with that. And I've still managed to communicate with all the others. So you know, sort of water off a duck's back, I think, as long as we're getting our message across.
Thank you, Danny. Zania, do you have experience to share?
I just wanted to mention something that Danny reminded me. I think there are some people out there that can hear loud voices because of their bubble of loud voices that are particularly anti-vax. And even if they want to learn more about vaccination, they are afraid to do so. And sometimes, you know, when there's a strong anti-vax environment, you will not change people's minds. You're not aiming to change the anti-vaxxers' minds, you're aiming to inform. One thing that I found that really helps, rather than preach, because we don't really want to be preaching to the converted, we want to change minds here, that's why we're doing this. One thing that I really mind is talk from your own experience. For example, if I talk about the merits of vaccination, I show them that I just had the jab. You know, if I talk about people want to know, would you vaccinate your children? Would you allow your parents to get vaccinated? What jab did your parents get? What jab did your family get? And get into these conversations and tell them why it's pointless to choose which vaccination you're going to get, and what a huge privilege it is for us to have access to vaccination. So always speak from the heart, speak from where you know. Another thing that people actually, and Danny reminded me with what he said, another thing that people wanted to know is, are you funded by big pharma? Are you in the pocket of pharmaceutical companies that are making millions and everything? And I think it's really important to say, I do study coronavirus infection. I do study the effects of vaccination and the immunity from vaccination. I am not linked with any clinical trial or any pharmaceutical company that is developing a vaccine. I see no money in this. So if you find yourself in a similar environment, put that out, put your disclaimers out, put your conflicts of interest out. It's really nice for people to hear that you don't have anything to gain by doing this.
Thank you very much. Mohammed.
Yeah, if I add something as well very quickly, I contracted COVID myself back in November, actually, and I had quite a bad experience with that one. So afterwards, and just before I get my first jab, I spoke in an interview as well about my personal experience with that one, shared experience with public as well. And also when I had my first jab done, I spoke about that experience again. So I think, we can always add something, which is like our personal experience. As Danny said, when people are accusing us of link to a pharma, for example, or getting any financial benefit of that one, we are human beings. We contract COVID ourselves. We get the jab, and we can reassure public about that one. And if pharmaceutical companies, for example, funding universities or laboratories, this is all for the development of science and research. And it's not to do with any direct, I would say, financial benefit coming from that one or that vaccine.
Thank you. I think that's really important, is that scientists are humans too. I think it's a really important message when you're engaging with the public. It's one that we've heard from patient groups that are like, oh, scientists are a bit scary, that they're untouchable. But actually, look, just normal people. So we've had a question which I think is really interesting, and it's one that I'll be interested to kind of hear from a variety of you. How do you change your communication strategy when you're talking to different audiences? And they've particularly asked about younger people, but I do know that you've all been engaging with different audiences. So maybe we can talk about the different audiences that we speak to and how we change and adapt our communication style. Does anybody want to start that one? I might pick on Danny, because I know that Danny has been talking to policymakers and also to healthcare workers. So I'll go to you, Danny. How do you change your communication style?
Yeah, no, I think without kind of bigging it up, I think you do need to have your sort of antennae out and be quite empathetic and try and hear what people are saying, because people are very different. And you might go in with your prior assumptions, and the cabinet ministers or whoever you're talking to might actually know surprisingly more than you thought they were going to, or surprisingly less. Or then the next day you might be speaking to religious communities. I've done some things with the Orthodox Jewish community, or you might be speaking to BAME healthcare workers, and these are different people, different knowledge bases, different concerns, different sensitivities. And if you go in as some sort of pompous git to try and educate them and preach to them, it's really not going to go down very well or be a very good interaction. So I think all any of us can do is have our antennae out and listen to what's being said.
Thank you, Danny. Does anybody else want to? Mohammed?
Yeah, if I add to what Danny said as well, I mean, I think it starts on my side always by identifying what are the most, I would say, like hot topics there in that community, or what are the most critical issues they want us to address there in that discussion. For example, if I go to a Muslim community, they want to learn as well about like the components of these vaccines, whether this is halal for them to take or not. We're coming now towards Ramadan. Is that halal to take the jab as well there in that period of time or not? If I have to talk to a group of ladies, for example, definitely talking about like fertility, pregnancy, all that stuff, it's quite important for them. Talking to an elderly community or diabetic population, it's a different message there, because I have to tweak the message to focus there on the complications and also the high risk of diabetes itself among those who are being contracted COVID. So I think, we have to address these concerns before we go and speak to these communities. With this, you're going to go always with the right answers to their expectations.
Yeah, definitely, Mohammed. I'll go to Viki next.
One question, and I'm dealing with people on a much more one-to-one basis than some of these other experts, but one question that I find always really useful is, what information would you need in order to feel comfortable making a decision? And quite often the information is out there, but the person hasn't come across it. A good example is, how long a pedigree the mRNA vaccines have. But another reason this is really important is because sometimes you're pitching it completely wrong. And I was speaking to a lady the other day who was breastfeeding, and she wanted to know if the vaccine was safe for her while breastfeeding. And I was explaining to her the reasons that we don't expect it gets into breast milk, and actually we now know for the mRNA vaccines it definitely doesn't. And she said to me, but how can the vaccine protect my entire body if it doesn't travel all around my body? So actually for her, what she needed was some really basic immunology information about how vaccines work, and that what's actually moving around is your immune cells. And actually for her, that's all she needed. And if I hadn't said, what is it that you actually really need to know here, I could have given her like endless studies, endless this, endless that, and none of it would really have been what she wanted to know.
Yeah, very good point, Viki. Zania, do you have any? Go for it, Zania.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that don't be afraid of pitching things wrong sometimes. Your message will be the same, but you can adapt it to different audiences. And the more public engagement you do, the more you learn how to deliver your message more effectively. You won't always get it right. Sometimes you're going to be having a room that's interested in what you have to say. Sometimes they won't be. It's absolutely okay. You are an immunologist. You are not a media star. And people do not expect you to be flawless. When you go on TV to answer a question from a journalist, they realize that you're an immunologist. They realize that you're not an actor, that you're perfectly poised, and that's okay. You're there to give a message, and it's a message that counts. About delivering the message to different audiences, I would say consider your jargon. consider what your audiences know, apart from what your audience is interested to know. Just consider how your delivery is actually crafted. Don't use words that you're going to lose half of the people in the audience with. So if you wanted, for example, to talk about an mRNA vaccine, do people understand what an mRNA vaccine is? So go back to basics, use simple language, depending on the audience that you are going to try and convince. Another thing I wanted to make sure that you sort of think of your message before you go to have this public engagement, before you have your interview, before you have you write your article or whatever it is you do in social media. Think about why you're doing it. What are you trying to achieve? And then shorten it as much as you can, as much as you possibly can, because people's attention spans are small. And when you talk to the media and when you want to tailor your message, for example, for consumption on the radio or on quotes, for example, think that journalists are really interested in sound bites, not on your life story. Don't explain all the biology of something. It might be fascinating for us as scientists, but a lot of people are not really interested in all the background. Try and condense your message as much as you can.
Thank you, Zania. We've had a specific question around how you suggest how the panel suggests engaging with people discussing reactions to vaccines, such as fevers and chills. And I think this is one that comes up quite often. So has anyone had experience of talking about that? Zania was nodding. Did you want?
I kind of thought about what Danny said earlier about the long-term effects of the vaccination. So a lot of the time I speak to people about how if you are going to get any adverse reaction, that will be very, very quickly as soon as you got the jab. The half-life of the vaccine in your body is not that great. It's not going to last for hundreds of years. So if you are going to have an allergic reaction, it's possibly going to happen very soon after vaccination. We have data on this. We can speak from experience. We can speak from data. Little adverse reactions like headaches and sore jabs, I think they are fantastic conversation starters. You know, people are getting the jab and they're saying, oh, how sore are you today? And then you talk about how immunity works. One question that I had from the audience that was actually quite interesting was, would you have your second jab in the same arm as the first one? It doesn't matter whether you're going to do it. And we were drawing from data to answer these questions, and it was actually quite fascinating.
Mohammed.
It's quite an interesting question, actually. So at the beginning of the vaccination campaign, I was always based on the data from clinical trials. And I used to say to people there, look, we get data from like 100,000 people in different clinical trials, and it was absolutely safe. And there was no like severe reactions causing like mortality or severe adverse events. Then later on, when we moved towards like the reality and the real evidence provided from like millions of people being vaccinated around the world, we used to say now, look, millions of people being vaccinated. We talk about half of the adult UK population being vaccinated, and it's absolutely safe. And if there are any red flags or any concerns, it will come definitely now from the real world data. So we move now from a stage to a different stage, from data coming from clinical trials, 100,000 patients, to a real world data, which is coming now from millions of people being vaccinated around the world. And that's exactly how we tackled, I mean, the questions coming around like one of the vaccines, when we talk about like the risk of clots, for example. You got numbers there talking when we say like we got 17 million people around Europe that being vaccinated with this vaccine, and when we look at the risk of that one compared to the public who are not being vaccinated, it's exactly the same, and there's no increased risk at all with that one. So it comes as a convincing evidence at this stage. So what I would recommend for people there when they tackle these questions in their campaigns, just to talk about the real world data now at this stage. We got millions and millions of people being vaccinated, and that's the bright example for that.
Viki, I'll bring you in.
I'd just like to add on something there, because in my conversations with people, what a lot of people don't necessarily realise is how seriously we take pharmacovigilance, or what we would call pharmacovigilance, but I would say tracking. And you know, so many people say to me, like, we have no idea what's happening, and they don't know about, you know, in the UK, the yellow card system, VAERS in the United States, Vigilance, CoWIN in India, and all of these places have these ways of tracking all of the side effects. And I think it's important to be very clear that we actually have systems to know about this, which means that if anything does happen that we weren't expecting, even if it's very rare, we can very rapidly respond.
Thank you, Vicky. Danny, I saw your hand go up. Sorry, sorry,
Because
Danny.
we've got a whole planet being vaccinated. Am I back?
You've been on mute. You're on now.
Yeah, no, because we're all being vaccinated all at once. It is a big talking point, isn't it? The you know, the events during the day or two afterwards. And as immunologists, it's easy for us to be dragged into a rabbit hole of oh, you know, I had I felt terrible and took to my bed for 2 days. Does that mean I had a really big immune response? Or I felt absolutely fine and didn't notice I'd been vaccinated. Does that mean I've made no response? And this is all just a bit too literal and a step too far, isn't it? Because you know, we shouldn't get dragged into that place because we have no data on it. And all I ever respond to, you know, in that vein, is that these are rather reactogenic vaccines because they are so potent, and you know, they truly are, you know, magnificent, better than any of us ever dreamt of this time last year. If you look at, you know, neutralizing antibody titers and T cell spot forming cell frequencies. So you know, I think if we just take it as read that reactogenicity is the evidence that they're very potent vaccines and that people have diverse responses, I feel, you know, happy to leave it at that.
Thank you, Danny. I'm going to stick with Danny because we've had a question come in around policy making. So it says policy decisions around vaccine rollout are now top news headlines. Do you find it difficult to separate your political from professional scientific when engaging about vaccines?
I hope I don't find it personally that difficult, but I think it's very easy to be entrapped because you know, people invite you for interview and they just want to have an interesting news program or PM program or Today program or whatever it is, and so you know, there will be many questions waiting for you about, you know, how you think this impinges on bad feeling after Brexit or whatever you know, political issue of the day it is. And I'd like to imagine that I've got quite good at laughing off those questions and saying, you know, I'm here as a professor is giving it without, you know, taking it.
Oh,
I hope.
we may have lost you towards the end there, Danny. Are you with us?
We may have lost you towards the end there, Danny.
So,
Are you?
yeah, no, so, you know, so all I was saying before I froze was that, you know, yes, they will try and corner and entrap you because there's always a political angle, and I feel quite in my comfort zone by saying, you know, that isn't my expertise. I'm here to talk about the immunology. You know, so I won't be drawn on what this means in terms of Brexit or Donald Trump or whatever the issue of the day is.
Thank you, Danny. Zania, did you have something to add? I saw you nodding along there.
I always don't. Sorry about that. So I totally agree. I think that one of the things that you need to consider, you may have views that you want to air, that's absolutely fine. But one of the things that you want to consider is who you're trying to reach. So if you're starting to criticize the government, when you're there to talk about vaccination, you're going to lose half your audience because half your audience are voting a different way than you think that they're voting or whatever. So if you're there to talk about vaccines, don't lose your audience. If you're a public health professor or an epidemiologist that is there to talk about the plans for lockdowns and stuff, that's different. That's a different message. You can talk about recommendations, but I would say try your best to stick to your message.
And this ties in quite nicely with something that someone else has just asked, is what do you do if you're asked a question that you don't know the answer to? Anyone want to tackle that one, Vicky?
I'm asked questions I don't know the answer to all the time. So I think that, you know, we undermine trust in ourselves if we just take a punt. Or, you know, if you are really on the spot because it's an interview and if you're really on the spot and you need to take a punt, you're like, well, for this reason, we think that, but we don't know for sure. But certainly when I'm talking to individuals, a lot of the time, I'm just like, that's a really interesting question. I actually hadn't thought of it before. And I'm actually going to go away and find out the answer to you. And I think that builds trust a lot more than having a guess, because if your guess is wrong, that's going to undermine trust.
Definitely. I think it's about being honest. Did anyone else have anything to add about that? Zania?
Yeah, I just wanted to say you're not supposed to know everything. You know, as a scientist, the limits of your knowledge, and in fact, that's what we're doing for a living. We're trying to push the knowledge a little bit further. But you need to have that in your comfort zone. You don't know everything. At some point as well, you'll be asked questions that the answer is not known. So if that is the case, then you can say research is happening at the moment on this aspect. So they are trying to work this out. And when they ask you this question that the answer is not known to, think about why they're asking you. Are they worried about something? Ask them further questions to understand where they're coming from and why do they need to know this answer to this question. Is it normal that we don't know the answer to the question? Is usually what plays in most people's minds. You know, and should we know about this before we get to the point of vaccination? Should we understand this? So if you find out that somebody wants to know, for example, the long-term effects for 10 years after the vaccine has been given, you can then go back and allay their concerns by saying that, you know, in no indication, you don't know the 10-year follow-up when you start rolling it out. What we do know, and based on facts, you know, we know that it is safe, we know the half-life of it, and this is how it works. So yeah, just find out why they want to know the answer to, you know, the question.
Mohammed?
Yes, if I add something here as well, wearing the hat of academic clinician, I receive lots of questions about like vaccination in special categories of patients, such as like age-related or related to specific comorbidities, or pregnancy, for example, or breastfeeding, and all these questions. As clinician, I mean, they always ask me these questions, and I would say simply about that one, if there's any data available from like clinical trials, then we can talk about that one. If that community or that group of patients or people not being studied within the clinical trial, that doesn't mean that these guys can't be vaccinated. We still are waiting for some like practical guidance or clinical guidance, and we are waiting for that one. And also the real world evidence, which will be provided now by millions of people being vaccinated, that will help us as well to make decision about these categories of patients. We know that at the beginning of the vaccine campaigns or the vaccinations, it started by like having some precautions which being lifted later on because we've been more comfortable and we got more safety data around the world about that one. So things may change as well around that campaign. And the honest answer always when we say I have no idea about that one, or that's not being studied, I think that's the best answer always if we're not sure about that one. And we can always refer them or signpost them to some specific like websites or some specific societies or organizations which tackle the vaccinations in these communities or group of patients.
Yeah, very valid. Thank you, Mohammed. Danny, did you have anything to add? We do have a couple more questions. So there's an interesting one here about how do you explain correlation versus causation to a public audience? And they've given an example, like if a person dies after getting the vaccine, but it doesn't mean that the vaccine caused their death. Danny, do you want to tackle this one?
Unmuted.
I think it is a challenging area, isn't it? Because you know, without being patronizing, understanding of stats and population health is not always a strength. And you know, most people intuitively have a very, you know, most people it's unfair, but you know, in the population, people have a very poor grasp of relative risk of different events. And I think these discussions are some of the most challenging. But you know, hopefully we've all kind of come on leaps and bounds in the last year.
Definitely, yeah. I think there's an interesting one around like framing risk, and I was gonna go to Viki for this one.
So I find a really useful way to speak to people about this to ask the question, how many, if we vaccinate, say, 51,000 pregnant women in the United States, which they've done, how many miscarriages do we expect to see? Or, you know, how many clots in this number of people do we expect to see based on the background rate? And if you can then go away and, you know, find out what the rate is expected to be, and then say, okay, well, we'd actually expect to see, you know, this many thousands of this event. How many of this event have we actually seen? Okay, and then you're like, okay, so we're actually seeing it at the rate that we would have expected to see it if we hadn't vaccinated the people. And so I think it's probably easier, instead of talking about causation, to dial it back into what would we have expected to see if we hadn't vaccinated them, and then are we seeing more than we would have expected to see? And this is, after all, what pharmacovigilance does. We're just doing it in more of a kind of like casual way when we're chatting to people.
Thank you, Viki. So, Mohammad, I'll go to you, but I'm just aware of time.
Yeah, very quickly, actually, just to add to what Viki said. So when we look at the figures there, whether this is like a significant difference or not, because sometimes, I mean, we may see in the vaccination group a bit higher numbers compared to the public as well. So we need to answer the question, is that like a significant difference or not? And secondly, even if there's like any differences, we need to go to the causality here. And causality will be like, will go under some investigations. So it's not like an easy answer to put there quickly to say, yes, it's definitely caused by this one. It has to go for thorough investigations based on the past medical history, on the current comorbidities the patient having, and also on blood samples and other investigations required in this case. So it's a complex process actually before we say it's definitely being caused by that one. And the bright example again about that one, it's the jab which being suspected to cause clots, and when they compared the figures with that one with the public, no significant differences at all. And when they looked into individual cases there in that one, it's not related at all.
Thank you, Mohammad. I'm aware of the time, and I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to have a little final say. So I have one which is hopefully going to end things on an inspiring note, and hopefully to encourage others to get out there and have those conversations with the public about vaccines, much like you all have been doing. So I'd like to know, on a professional and a personal level, what have you got out of doing public engagement? I'm going to pick on someone. I'm going to go to Zania first.
Yes, I got a lot out of it, actually. I really enjoy talking to people about immunology. It has also improved the way I communicate my science. I think my writing has improved when I started to write for lay audiences, and that filters down to my grant applications now that are not written for just the specialists. I think it all makes sense to practice your engagement as much as possible, apart from the fact that it's your duty as an immunologist to explain immunology when you're called to do it. It's very good fun as well. You get to meet a lot of people. You get to influence a lot of people beyond your small sphere of understanding. And in fact, you get to inspire other people to follow in your footsteps. So don't worry if you don't look like a typical scientist. That's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for people to go out there and inspire anybody to get involved in science. And what I really like to hear is when somebody writes to me and says, oh, I decided to do immunology, or oh, I decided, you know, to do biology at school, and you know, you help a little bit with that. Another thing that it's very rewarding is to hear when somebody has changed their mind about vaccination. You feel like you have made a real impact in changing someone's misconceptions and hopefully saving someone's lives. I mean, people like Mohammed do that all the time. Scientists like me, fundamental scientists, don't really get to do that on a daily basis. So it's a real privilege to hear back from somebody saying, thank you, actually, my nan will get the vaccine because of you, or, you know, I decided to vaccinate myself as well. So you get a lot back from it. Another thing that you might get back from it on a professional level is if you put yourself out there, collaborators might contact you and want to work with you, and you extend your sphere of interests as well. So it's not all just about public engagement. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it at that. Highly recommended.
Thank you, Zania. Thank you. Danny, what have you got out of it?
You know, that I've met incredibly just diverse, interesting people that I probably wouldn't have met otherwise, and really learned a lot from them. So I've got that out of it. and also just the reward of being an immunologist who's, like everybody here, spent all this time doing this stuff, and now, without sounding evangelical about it, having these amazing vaccines to tell people about, because have I frozen again? Did I freeze there?
You're good.
I'm okay. Yeah, having these amazing vaccines with these amazing neutralizing titers, and being able to say to people, if you have the vaccine, you will have neutralizing antibody titers in the high hundreds or thousands, and virus won't be able to get past your ACE2 receptors and won't be able to infect your cells, is a very easy sell.
Thank you so much, Danny. Mohammed, I'm aware that we are at 1 o'clock, so super quickly, what have you got out of it, Mohammed?
Very quick, actually. So it has given me the real meaning of translation medicine. So as academic clinician, I could see myself now translating what I've learned in the world of immunology and bring that one to public and patients. That's on a hand. On the other hand as well, it has given me the opportunity to talk about myself as a human being, someone who has been working as a clinician and a scientist and got ill with COVID-19 and then being jabbed, and to share experience with other people as well, because that's the real meaning of my job when I talk about myself as academic clinician. It has given me as well the opportunity to network with other colleagues on both sides, on scientist side, like this lovely group of people from BSI, and also from the clinical side as well. And to my clinician colleagues as well, those who say to me always, oh Mohammed, you're spending too much time working in science then. And now it's the real reward for me when I say, yes, the science I spent many years on now, it's talking and it's benefiting public and people there around me. And the great lesson for me as well, which I've learned from this one, that we need to invest more and more on public and patient involvement and engagement, where they will become real partners in designing and supporting research and academia in the future.
Thank you, Mohammed. And Viki?
Luckily for me, no one has yet mentioned probably the biggest thing that I've got out of doing the public engagement that I've been doing, which is that I have learned a lot of science. People have asked me questions that I haven't thought to ask myself, and I've gone away and I've found the answers, as a result of which I know so much more than I did this time last year. And so, yes, it's great when people say, oh, I've made a decision based on the evidence that you've collected, but actually I do think this has made me stronger as a scientist. So that's my personal bonus for doing public engagement.
Thank you very much, Viki, and thank you all of you for joining me today. It's been a really interesting discussion. We've had lots of questions that we weren't able to answer, but they can be found in our guide to COVID vaccination. So do check it out. Do join us across social media today, #ExploreVaccines, and do check out the website and find out all the support that we offer. And thank you all so much for joining us today, and I will see you all very soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.